I just want to say a very quick word about Futerra. Kathy gave us a great introduction, but our founding principle is to make sustainable development so desirable it becomes normal. And the idea of this is that people will run towards visions and compelling images of a positive future with more energy and stamina. They will run away from kind of threats of apocalypse and Armageddon and dystopia. We work with all sorts of people. I don't need to talk about that now, but in a nutshell, I describe us as the agency that gives a shit. We're like every other communications agency out there, but we only work on issues around sustainability. And I actually had my first formal complaint about this slide last week, but I've done it about 30 times. Most people take it in the spirit it's meant. I'm
There's
also
a
a tree
worse
hugger.
one coming up, though.
This is me trying to do the kind of closed-arm conservation on a tree, which is rather larger. But I want to just say a couple of words about the challenge, and I'm sure we've touched on some of these points already over the last couple of days. But really, so much of this is about choice. I think our awareness and our understanding and the discussions and the debates which go on at the highest level in places like Nagoya do put us in a position of power, because we are actually informed now of the scale of the threat and the challenge that we face. And that, some people find that intimidating. I personally find that incredibly empowering, because it means you know what you've got to do in order to conserve and sort this problem out. So I like to see this as a kind of save or delete challenge, and we're embracing the save option here. And obviously this is a Banksy image, which is quite appropriate for this particular city. And we've also had high-profile film engagements now. You know, documentaries have made a big resurgence, connecting people in with some of the complexity of these issues. The End of the Line, in particular, has been a brilliantly popular film shown all over the world, really bringing to a kind of sharp focus the oceanic challenge, which is quite personal to me, because my original training was as a marine biologist. And the reason I got into a lot of this work is because I kept saying to people, if you don't stop catching all the fish, there won't be any fish. So I decided I had to get into communications because I wasn't getting that message across quite well enough. And then, of course, you've got the biggest grossing film of all time, Avatar, which, however you want to frame it, takes these messages to a completely different audience, a massive mass audience that we crave to engage with. And whether everyone gets the intricacies of the biodiversity and the indigenous ethnic rights which underpin the story of Avatar, they are at least touched by the wonders of that particular world. And we need to try and replicate that with the real wonders of our real world, rather than this fantastical Pandora. And just a very quick point on the similarities between the financial and the ecological crises, and people often miss these. I think this is quite a good way of engaging people in the debate, because actually the financial crisis was caused by a lack of adequate capital, underpinning layer upon layer of derivatives trading and collateralized debt obligations that everyone was swapping back and forth, until someone finally said, well, you need to pay me. And they go, oh, we haven't actually got any money. And if you like, on the flip side, ecologically, we're doing a similar thing. We're drawing down on the ecological capital and not living off the interest. And anyone who says you can't fix both has a very tiny mind. And I'm sure you've touched on TEEB. But when you start to talk about the numbers involved here, and I think this is the really mind-boggling point, it becomes quite fascinating. So global subsidies amount to $1 trillion a year for a lot of things we're trying to address. Now, how long in time, because I think we lose sight of how big these numbers are, how long in time do you think 1 million seconds is? Any guesses? Come on, someone have a guess. 1 million seconds. How long is 1 million seconds? 12 days. How long is 1 billion seconds? 30 years. And how long is 1 trillion seconds? Any guess? 31,688 years. That's how big the numbers stack up. So when we talk about the cost of saving biodiversity and the kind of bailout of the financial crises, these are mind-boggling numbers. Neanderthals were still roaming Europe 31,000 years ago. So just to put that in perspective, the trouble is the narrative we have and the consumer culture we have and the way our economy is based is this is the overriding message. Every time we get into a crisis, everyone's saying, for God's sake, get out there and shop, or the whole thing's going to come crumbling around our ears. And so we have to try and address this narrative that's out there at the moment and pull our heads out of our backsides. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Tim.
And the moral of this tale is, never try and follow Ed Gillespie. So, down to some practical stuff. We're talking about language. Language is the stuff that cements relationship. We know it in our own lives. That's what we do. But what we're talking about is the language that we use as a community to all of those people out there, all of those billions and billions of people out there. So it's the language of relationship. What kind of relationship do we have, and how is that formed by the language that we use? So I imagine quite a few of you know about this. Springwatch, kind of reality telly with blue tits and things like that, but also some underlying important issues and all of that, engaging people in late May and June, should be called Summer Watch, yeah, all of that. And then this one, BBC Two, 8:30 tonight, I shouldn't be here. These are brands. These are now brands. These reach between 2 and 4 million people, depending on what's on the other side. But actually, if you look at the reach of the brand now, these are brands that are, I like to say, they're brands to be used, not to be used by. So we think of these as quite extrovert brands that a lot of people have joined in on. So you get this on kids telly, you get this on news, you get this on local radio. That's just within the BBC. I know there's people from the RSPB here. They make very good use of this brand, as do WWT, you know, Wildlife Trust, all sorts of people. And rightly so. Because what we've got here is a brand, the beginnings of a language, the beginnings of an identity that forms a relationship through which we, as a community, can talk to all of those people out there. So if you're not using it already, join in and use it, because that's what it's designed to be. This is genuine BBC public service broadcasting, Mr. Murdoch. Relationship. If you're communicating with someone, the most important thing to do is know yourself first. So you know who you are before you start talking to people. So this is something we work on quite a lot. Anyone who has watched Spring Watch and Autumn Watch would maybe recognize these kind of attributes. We call them brand values, but that's a bit of marketing toss, really. It's just, what's our reputation? How do people talk about us? How does it feel? How does it feel to be in a conversation with Spring Watch or Autumn Watch? So I'll start unpicking this a bit later, but this is kind of who we are. Quite touchy-feely kind of things, and then a bit of kind of more factually stuff, and that we're about the UK. We're kind of very in the moment, which is why I shouldn't be here. And, you know, we're trusted and we're easy, and we welcome people in, which means we can welcome in partners. So that's the beginnings of a relationship and the beginnings of a language that we have started to use. And we're 7 years old now. Can't quite believe it, but, you know, we've been around for 7 years. So this year, we tried something different. We worked with the BBC Wildlife Fund, which I hope many of you know about. Fabulous bit of the BBC, a bit like Children in Need, but for wildlife, which is looking to raise money from all of those people out there in the public, and then channel it to you guys, channel it to the people who are actually doing the conservation. So it's a conduit. And so BBC Two got in touch with me and the Spring Watch gang and put us together with the BBC Wildlife Fund, and we created the Wild Night in just after Spring Watch this year. Now, Spring Watch and Autumn Watch are quite well known for getting their audience to be active, to actually get off their asses and do something. The old, I'm showing my age now, why don't you get off your, switch off your television set and go and do something less boring instead? Yeah? Oh, yeah, I can see the older ones in the audience. So this was a new challenge for us, which was, how do we get people to be active about something that actually is happening at the other side of the world, that they may not actually be able to see or smell or ever see, have any contact with in their lives, but how can we get them to be active? And the way to get them to be active is to give us your money. Simple as that. A big, blunt ask of giving money. So we came up with the Wild Night In, which actually borrowed from some of the learning from Spring Watch about the sort of relationship we needed to have with an audience that would then allow us to say, do you know what? Give us your money now. Give us your money. And they did. They did. So here, if you like, here's the bare bones of the BBC Wildlife Fund. There's the mission at the top. And then notice some similarities here. We're hopeful. We want to make a clear difference. Everyone's welcome to join in, to celebrate the beauty and wonder of the natural world. We're trustworthy, we're accountable, independent, we're open to challenge, and we support positive action which provides tangible results. Notice, absolutely no, the world is fucked and it's all your fault. Notice, join us, happy, celebratory. We want to do this with you, all right? So we tried an interesting new experiment working with the BBC Wildlife Fund to have that kind of experience, and on one night we raised £1.2 million, which is now going straight to conservation charities. BBC didn't take a single bit of the cut. So that's actually now being funneled out by the BBC Wildlife Fund. So it's been an interesting year trying something new, because we've never done if you like, a fundraiser before. But that's what I'd like you to start thinking about. We'll get into some of the detail in a minute. But the relationship. Who are we before we start actually having that relationship through language with the people we need to reach? Because if we don't do that, actually we get too bogged down in the stuff that Paul was talking about, the acronyms and our own business. They're not interested in our business. They expect us to do that. We're conservationists. You get on and conserve things. Just tell me why I should care. So this is a new phenomenon for people like me who grew up making films literally on film, on television where there were only 3 channels to watch. This is the world we now live in. This is a world where our audience, all of our audience, now have infinite choice. They have immensely more power to choose to watch us, to listen to us, or crucially, to not bother and turn the other cheek. So how are we delivering in this new space? Cue Ed.
We do the tag team. There we go. So just a couple of insights from this particular campaign, because we actually did the messaging and branding for the International Year of Biodiversity 2010. I don't want to dwell on this too much, because actually I want to make sure we've got time to get into the juicy bits. But just to share with you the nightmare of trying to come up with a logo which encapsulates the full diversity of life on Earth. It's incredibly difficult, incredibly politically charged. Everyone criticises you at every step of the process. People say your fish look like flying bombs. Your wave is breaking in a hydrographically incorrect fashion. Your flamingo looks like a velociraptor. You've got a tree. Can we have an ear of corn? No, actually half the world eats rice. Can you make it a grass? There's no insect in there, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to talk through this either, but actually the piece of work that we did for the narrative, because it's all about language, I think is a really powerful 300 or 400 word summary of our relationship with biodiversity. And so I'm not going to read it out because it's quite long, but it's supposed to be written in very, very accessible, punchy, populist language, which actually explains a lot of the complexities and interdependencies of us in the natural world. But it's supposed to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up on end. And I think it does that to a certain extent. And I loved it when Ed Norton became a spokesperson for the International Year of Biodiversity, because anyone who's seen Fight Club was saying, the first rule of Biodiversity Club is you don't talk about biodiversity. And I intend to kind of subvert that and invert it. Of course, it's gone all over the world, strange interpretations. I'm not quite sure what this Arabic poster is trying to say, whether it's about funneling all of biodiversity into the mouth of a dead tyrannosaur. Kind of, that's what it looks like to me, but I could be missing some nuances there. It also went to the Football World Cup, and actually the point that was raised just before we came on about the use of images in advertising. This has been a particular bugbear of mine for many years, because I think mainstream advertising has hijacked our imagery and taken it away from us. I actually wrote a blog in The Guardian this week about image rights for nature, and saying every time one of these companies wants to use these images, they should be paying into a biodiversity conservation fund. Thank you very much. And similarly with the footballers, maybe we can take some footballer tax on Wayne Rooney, and tax his wildlife and use it to conserve wildlife. And this is my own kind of nightmare, because as many of you may know, I gave up flying on holiday about 7 years ago. I went around the world without flying, and then my logo ends up on the side of an Airbus. So it was a bit of a bitter moment when that happened. And that brings us back to the opportunity, which I'm going to hand back to Tim on.